I stood here last year and I gave a presentation, and it was a presentation on a man called Edward Hammond, who was one of my predecessors at Sevenoaks. Lovely story about him, slightly sad ending, but it's available in the transaction, so please buy your copy if you don't have it yet. Edward Hammond, who lived in the mid-18s, well, he was a minister in the 1860s. He trained for ministry. It was a strange story as to how he started to train for ministry. He went in very late in life, wasn't your typical student for the ministry at the time. But he trained at Manchester College in London, as it was at the time. And so, which is a great way to actually lead into our three talks this afternoon. What we're going to have, first of all, is a team effort where only one member of the team has arrived. But Howard will be presenting sort of on behalf and with his own interpretation of David Wykes' intended presentation on Manchester College when it was in London. So the time that Edward Hammond was there, and that's something that Howard will be talking about. I won't surprise many of you to say that, of course, the building in which Manchester College was based is no longer Manchester College and is, in fact, Dr. Williams's library. And Alan will be talking to us about Dr. Williams's library as our second talk this afternoon. All of this, of course, wraps up into the glorious history of our movement as it is and as it progresses. And so our third speaker will be David Steers, who will talk about 100 years of the Historical Society and its transactions. So hopefully a nice flow of those three. I'm certainly looking forward to this afternoon, and I hope you are too. So if I could turn over, first of all, to Howard.
Well, this, as was explained, this is David Wykes' talk. David is in North America, attending a conference and, of course, drumming up support for Dr. Williams's library. And his talk is entitled Manchester New College, London and University Hall. In June 1853, Manchester New College gave up teaching students for the University of London arts degree, and the trustees transferred the college and the ministerial students from Manchester to London with the intention of creating, quotes, a theological institution in connection for literary and scientific purposes with University College. For the first time since the college was founded in 1786, the education of lay students was no longer part of its work, and the college became, in effect, a seminary for the training of Unitarian ministers. This was the end of an ambitious attempt to create a university college in Manchester. The college had been founded in Manchester in 1786 to provide a replacement in the north of England for the celebrated Warrington Academy. As early as 1792, the committee admitted that the funds were insufficient. The college nearly closed then and again in 1797 because of financial difficulties. In 1803, the college moved to York, where Charles Wellbeloved was minister. Otherwise, it would probably have closed then. The financial situation did improve following the appointment of a new treasurer in 1808, and the increasing support from some of the leading Unitarian families helped to transform the situation. At one level, named educational, the college at York was highly successful. It educated the leading Unitarian ministers of their generation, of whom James Martineau was the outstanding figure. The lay students included some of the great industrial leaders of the period, included the sons of some of the great industrial leaders of the period, including 4 of the leading cotton spinners of the day, and also 3 future MPs. But Manchester College at York, despite its educational achievements, was in many respects a failure. The number of students was too small. In nearly 4 decades, the college only educated 112 laymen and 123 ministers. The type of education was of interest only to those who were Unitarians or were sympathetic to Unitarianism. The college returned to Manchester in 1840 and was renamed Manchester New College to mark a number of major changes. The decision was taken to expand and restructure the work of the college by offering theological training for the Unitarian ministry entirely separate from a general university education, which, deprived of its sectarian character, it was thought would appeal to students and parents more widely. At the same time, the college obtained the privilege of matriculating and graduating its students at London University. Additional teaching posts were created. The number of new tutors increased almost 4-fold. At York, the literary and scientific subjects had been taught by 2 tutors, with Well-Beloved providing the whole of the theology course. There had been doubts whether it would be possible at Manchester to fill all the required teaching posts. But the more serious challenge was the cost of supporting the much larger teaching body. The original ambitious plan of 11 professors had been reduced to 8 by 1846 and to 6 by 1853 because of financial problems. The creation of a university college offering a broad liberal education proved a failure. Only 29 lay students were enrolled at Manchester. The college failed because, despite every effort, it was seen as a Unitarian institution and therefore treated with fear and suspicion by the Orthodox. The challenge of providing a comprehensive university education meant that the independent existence of the college was clearly no longer viable, and the committee came to recognise that the college could only continue as a school of theology. The problems of the college were exacerbated by the setting up of a rival institution in London, namely University Hall, which in fact is the building you see on the screen. University Hall had been built to commemorate the passing of the 1844 Dissenters' Chapels Act, which saved Unitarian endowments from the Orthodox, with the aim of providing accommodation for the sons of non-subscribing Protestant dissenters, in other words, Unitarians, attending University College London. It also sought to give private instruction in theology, mental and moral philosophy, and other subjects, which, to avoid sectarian disputes, University College either did not teach or did not teach fully. Despite opposition from supporters of Manchester College, who feared that by providing theological instruction, University Hall would be in direct competition, around £10,000 was raised to build a hall on the west side of Gordon Square in London to the design of Thomas Leverton Donaldson, Professor of Architecture at the University of London. Eschewing the neoclassical grandeur of University College, the style chosen was Tudor Gothic. The Inquirer noted approvingly, quotes, "the college-like appearance of the building, thus avoiding the risk of being mistaken for a clubhouse." Completed in 1849, the new hall had lecture rooms, a common room, library, a resident principal, and rooms for 30 students. Nevertheless, it struggled to fulfill its purpose, in part because the founders had failed to agree clearly on the aims of the institution. Some had wanted it openly associated with Unitarians, others feared that would distance it from University College. The awkward rivalry with Manchester New College did not help, with both institutions competing for lay students and for funds. Attempts by the Committee of University Hall to offer some kind of cooperation were rejected by the college. Yet it was feared that neither could survive without the other. Although the independent existence of Manchester College was clearly no longer viable by 1850, the trustees had great difficulty in agreeing on the future. Those who wanted the college to remain in Manchester favoured a connection with Owens College, but the new institution had only just commenced its first session. A special general meeting was held on the 8th of December, 1852. After a lengthy debate, a resolution was passed accepting the invitation from University Hall in London, and arrangements were made for the transfer of the college to London. The two institutions shared the building, but did not merge. They had their own students, principals, and lectures. The Council of University Hall was in favour of amalgamation under a new constitution, with the assignment of the lease of the hall to a new united society. But the college committee preferred to remain independent and enter the hall as a tenant. There was subsequently some sharing of tutors, and it was intended that the students should socialise together. Although the college wanted to promote a practical union with University Hall and to encourage students to reside there, the costs were too high for those on a college grant of £60 a year. The Council of University Hall made a number of suggestions to improve matters, but none found favour with the college. The Council of University Hall generously offered to accommodate the college on terms as easy as its own financial situation would allow, agreeing initially to a rent of £100 a year. They made available the large hall on the ground floor, where the students dined and which was used for public meetings and lectures. But for the college students to read their sermons and orations. Above the hall, they provided a room of the same dimensions for the library, which the college fitted up with additional shelves and bookcases. In front of this, facing Gordon Square, was a large room where most of the lectures were given and where the books belonging to University Hall were kept. What is perhaps a surprise, the present appearance of the reading room is the result of the improvements introduced in 1853 by Manchester College rather than in Donaldson's original design. The College Council was given a report by the principal, J.J. Taylor, in July 1853. He told them that the room assigned for the library, though the best in the hall, is awkwardly constructed, so much space sacrificed to large, unprofitable lights, in other words, windows. Around 1,500 square feet was required for the books, and that to provide sufficient space, it was necessary to construct screens or bookcases projecting out into the floor of the room. He argued that the college spend £20 or £30 more than was strictly necessary to avoid offending the eye and spoiling the room. I see clearly it will improve our relations with the hall and promote our working together. It was eventually resolved that the gallery would be erected by University Hall and the bookcases on the floor of the reading room by the college. It is not entirely clear what work was undertaken by the college, but it does appear one of the windows on the south side of the reading room was blocked up at the lower level, though left as a window in the gallery. University Hall appears to have constructed the gallery on one side of the reading room, running across the top of the college's new bookcases or screens. In the end, it cost the college £220 to move the books to London and to pay for the fitting out of the library. The total cost of the move to London was £350, so the library was a major part of the expenditure. In 1860, the college obtained permission to extend the gallery on the other side of the library and build additional bookcases. By the early 1880s, it was clear that the financial difficulties of the hall were such that if there was no change, the hall would have to close. In June 1882, the University Hall Society was dissolved and the property transferred to the college. The college moved to Oxford in 1889, selling University Hall to the trustees of Dr. Williams's charity, and the building now houses Dr. Williams's library.
Who was Dr. Daniel Williams and his library? Now seen in this fine 19th century building in Gordon Square, not far from Euston Station. Daniel Williams was born about 1643 near Wrexham. Nobody knows for certain who his father was, and his mother is at nothing better than a guess. Later in life, Williams said he had no other occupation but reading from the age of 5. How depressing. He had little formal education, but was preaching regularly by the age of 18 and entered a form of ministry the following year. That year was 1662, and most of us know that that was the year of the Great Ejection. And what a time to start on a ministry as a 19-year-old. Daniel was a Presbyterian and went to Ireland as a private chaplain. From 1667, he had a long ministry at Wood Street Chapel in Dublin. It was here in 1675 he married his first wife, Elizabeth Meredith, widow of Thomas Juxon, who had aristocratic connections. So he's on the rise. It was his wives, and he had 2, who some say were very important in the story, not in themselves, but because they had money, particularly the first one. Williams had no children, and so they entailed the money onto them. And this has meant modern scholarship has shown that we really don't know where his money came from. But he never had financial worries and clearly lived well on his migration to London in 1687. He looks a bit fattish there, doesn't he? He was able to purchase libraries of dissenting ministers following his first wife's death in 1698. In religious terms, Williams was a steady influence, though he engaged in disputatious theological arguments. He was considered by some to be a form of dissenting bishop, not Unitarian, he wasn't Unitarian, of dissenting bishops. It was said he behaved like a privy councillor, for he was advisor to King William on Irish affairs in the 1690s. He was very careful with money. John Evans, in his funeral sermon for William, said, he exercised a frugality as to his own person, possibly to an excess. Well, he doesn't look as though he cut out the food, does it? A critic saw him as, quotes, the greatest bundle of pride, affectation, and ill manners he had ever met with. Well, that's certainly critical. Well, there's a little bit of evidence of that, because in his will, he said that his books and his trusts should continue for not 100 years, but 2,000. So we haven't got long to go, about 1,700 years. In 1711, he was clearly getting infirm, so he made his will, which was extremely long and convoluted. David Wykes is going through it again, which has been done 2 or 3 times, and he says it's nearly 8,000 words long. It is, yes. I've seen copies of it. But even so, he made a codicil, which his wife then, his second wife, objected to, and so there was endless wrangling. He died on the 26th of January, 1716. That's the 300th anniversary. And he was buried in Bunhill Fields burial ground. The will was to be administered by 23 Presbyterian trustees. About a third were laymen, who Williams himself appointed. They did not get going until 1721, 5 years after his death. There's his tomb. A bit more about that later. That's only taken this year by me. They got going after 1721 because there was endless disputes. As they were Presbyterians, they appointed other Presbyterians as their successors, both ministerial and lay, who did the same over time. And as you know, English Presbyterians became Unitarian in belief, which has meant that for the last 200 years at least, nearly all its trustees have been Unitarians. I've now been there the longest. I'm the senior trustee at a mere 41 years. For about the last 100 years, some of the new appointments have been either Baptist, Congregational, and Quaker, being generous to balance out the denominations. Unitarians have always been in the majority and remain so today. Some commentators have said the trust looks like a Unitarian closed shop. My response to that is, you might say that, I couldn't possibly comment. Now to the library. Daniel Williams stated that his books and that of the purchased libraries should be open to the public to read. He left money for a junior minister at the enormous sum of £10 a year, but not for much else. The legal arguments plus getting the land cost £450, and the building erected cost £1,518. I think we can go on and see the building. There it is, in Red Cross Street in London. And so that was wet. So it didn't get going until January 1730. Some books say 1729, but the latest research say with the old calendar it's January 1730. The trustees got permission later on to add books, and it was added to endlessly over the years. And it became really the centre for London dissent, and nationally in many ways for the whole of all the denominations. The library was but one of the remits given by the trustees. Dating from his time in Ireland, Daniel Williams had a strong antipathy to Roman Catholics. So he left money for the support of ministerial study at the University of Glasgow. Indeed, his will states that if ever the state religion in England was to become Roman Catholic, then all of his trust funds were to go to Scotland. Scotland were Hague. Not happened yet. Support was also given to a wide variety of disadvantaged groups. The trust was responsible for a school for girls in North Wales, book grants for ministers was a feature for many years of the work, so that they could set up their library. Many here had a Dr. Williams book grant. Now, if the minister's here, who has had a Dr. Williams's book grant? There you are. Thank you very much. You can see that it's all around you. And so that was it. The libraries had more than one home. It stayed at this site in Red Cross Street from 1730 onwards, but in 1873 it moved to nearby Grafton Street. There it is, a rather not imposing building, but in 1870 that's where it went. It's near Heels, you know, the well-known furniture. It's near there. And then when Manchester College, as has already been said, moved out in 89, they bought the lease and got in there. Dr. Williams moved in. And it was a long lease, and events that showed that it was the right thing to do, because just over 50 years later, a bomb dropped on that and was entirely flattened. So if they hadn't have moved, no Dr. Williams. The will states that his trustees must meet regularly, and up to 4 times a year should have a dinner together. Perhaps it's one of the things most people widely know about Dr. Williams's trust. In the past, the food consumed could be enormous. There are certain books that list it, and don't know how they got through it. And as the trustees invite guests to their dinners, today the trustees, now it's at 18, it's been reduced from 23 to 18, they eat more modestly. And the practice of dining together has been adopted by other similar trusts, like the Hibbert Trust, because at meals, relationships are developed and actions planned. The aspect mostly known about these dinners is that it's said we always have roly-poly pudding. Indeed, from about the 1750s, this was true. And for many years as a trustee, I did enjoy it. Indeed, I have to say that there is one person attending these General Assembly meetings, who I shall not name, who always had 2 second helpings. You can try and work out who that was. It's no longer a trustee. I shall leave that past and go on from there. Now to the library itself. In its early years, it had perhaps 10,000 books. But this figure increased as libraries of leading dissenters were added and purchase of new books were allowed. By the middle of the 19th century, the figure had grown to upwards of 25,000. A big expansion took place around 1900, so that by the time of the bicentenary in 1916, there were some 66,000 volumes. Today, the figure has grown excessively. And it's now thought there are about 280,000 books plus manuscripts. So it's a very large library. It's the primary library for the study of dissent, though John Ryland's University Library in Manchester sometimes contests this claim. The holdings include church history, theology, general history, philosophy, religion in many of its manifestations, plus runs of journals. It's even got some novels. It has a large collection of chapel histories of all denominations. In fact, it's the biggest collection of chapel histories anywhere of dissenting chapels, recording the nonconformist parts. It's also the repository of archives. This is where you may be involved, because it has all the historic archives of the British and Foreign Unitarian Association, and up to 40 years ago, all the records of the General Assembly. It has some unusual things, amazing oddities. It's got Oliver Cromwell's death mask. That's really a good addition to dissenting things, isn't it? But the most interesting thing from my point of view, and only certain people, is a panoramic map, 15 feet long. And this is a panoramic map of Istanbul, or Constantinople, and was taken in 1913. Studies have shown that it was produced in France for the German Secret Service, and was therefore of use in times of war. How it got there, nobody knows. Not like the thing that's usually held by dissenting ministers. The library's got a nice new website. Just go onto it and Google Dr. Williams's library. You can go straight to the catalogue of holdings. But unfortunately, it's not complete. You have to go to a card-inked scroll. But it's getting there. It still has a large number of volumes there, but a nice modern website that's only been put up in recent months. The library membership's on a subscription basis for regular users, but if you have a query about your chapel, then make contact, and I'm sure the staff will do what they can to help you. Library director is David Wykes, who gave the first part of this thing that Howard read, whose knowledge of dissent is, of course, encyclopedic. The building is much as it was in the 19th century. Can we have a look? That's an early plan that we've already discussed. Can we go on? Oh, hold on. This is the miserable part. This is the combined staff in about 1905. Look at that lovely lady at the end there, with a cheerful face. The second, a cheerful face. The gentleman in the middle is the librarian, Robert Travers Herford, well-known figure. And all the rest of them don't look too cheerful. That woman, some of the other women look positively dreadful. I don't mean dreadful nasty, I mean dreadfully miserable. When you get this inside of Dr. Williams, have you got any next one we can show? There he is, that's the memorial to him from English Heritage, put on the wall. And there it is today. And that's that early building, all beautifully done up. There we are, that's how you find it. A bit of map I put on there. You can't go very far away. It's surrounded, as you can see, by University College. Very easy to get to. His tomb is on February the 7th, 1816. Several trustees made a pilgrimage to his tomb in Bun Hill Fields. And later that day, they had a dinner chaired by the Lord Mayor of London. It was just useful that year he was a dissenter. The Inquirer, and then in 1916 they visited again, but didn't make much of a celebration, and the Inquirer stated it was the war that prompted this. Did the trustees make a similar visit on the 26th of January 2016? No. We're saving ourselves being softer for the summer meeting on the 7th of July. When, following a lunch at the library, we are making our pilgrimage to Bun Hill Fields in what we hope will be good weather, followed by a tea at that heretical institution, Wesley's Chapel, opposite, which is just there, and we therefore will invite other people to join us, to everybody to say nice things. There have been short histories of the trust that appeared in 1816, nothing in 1916, so a new history of the Trust has been commissioned from the Reverend Dr. Alan Argent, which is hoped to be published in the not-too-distant future. So, in summary, if you're interested in knowing more about Dr. Williams's library, go to the website and see what's there. Wait for the book to come. Buy it, and you'll see everything you can do, and you can see all the familiar names listed there that are Unitarian almost to the core. So that is a celebratory event of Dr. Williams's library.
Right. Well, first of all, can I say a word of thanks to Alan Ruston and to Sue Caloran of Harris Manchester College Library, without whose help there are a lot of things in the Inquirer I wouldn't have been able to see. There's not available in Belfast, but they got me lots of useful copies of documents. But we're now in the middle of what we might term a period of centenaries for the Unitarian Historical Society. If you can see there, first mooted in 1914, then constituted the next year, first public meeting October 1915, on to the first AGM transaction 1917. So about a 3-year period where it all happened. And as such, we came late onto the scene. There are our brother and sister organizations. You can see they're all founded before we were. So it's really the tail end of a trend towards a more careful appreciation of nonconformist history from a denominational standpoint. Now, an interest in the various branches of Protestant dissenting history wasn't new. This had been evident throughout history, particularly in the life and work of people like Edmund Calamy and indeed Daniel Williams. And over the centuries, the study had broadened to include
all aspects of human behavior and to utilize different tools and methodologies from many disciplines. And all this has come into play in the study of Unitarian and dissenting history. And the foundation of the society, indeed all of these societies, is reflective also of a growing interest in local history, beginning in the Victorian period, which explored many aspects of society, including churches and church history, usually from a frankly confessional point of view. And Victorian society developed tremendous antiquarian interests, which fed into all forms of church life. And history became important both to stretch the historical longevity of any particular denomination, and this was particularly important for Unitarians, to illustrate their legal claims for particular property or trust that they'd held over time. But the time that these societies came into fruition was one of the greatest confidence for nonconformist churches in Britain. They were numerous, still apparently growing, and carried great influence in the period up to the First World War. And they were generally born out of a mixture of denominational pride and a growing sense of the value of intellectual study and a belief in the preservation of records, buildings, and artifacts, all related to history. So the idea for this society was first mooted at the annual meetings of the British and Foreign Unitarian Association in 1914, and its proposer was John Crosby Warren of Nottingham. Now, his idea was taken up with some enthusiasm, and at the annual meeting of the B&FUA the following year, 1915, the society was constituted. Its council and officers were appointed and given the job of drafting rules for the new society. In October 1915, the council met to consider the rules, and a public meeting was held in Essex Hall, at which the new treasurer, Mr. R. Mortimer Montgomery, KC, read a paper. And at the initial meeting, those present drew up the objects. And there are the objects drawn up 100 years ago and still the objects of the society today. So basically, you can boil it down to study, preservation, and publication. And on the whole, I think the society has lived up to these objects admirably, at least whenever full cooperation has been forthcoming from individuals and trustees, districts, and Essex Hall. And a good early example of productive cooperation was the correction of the dates of the foundation of congregations in the yearbook, something which the society has generally done ever since. At the start, subscriptions were set at 5 shillings per annum or £5 for life membership. So if you took out life membership, you did well. No longer available because it didn't prove cost effective. Institutional subscriptions were 10 shillings in those days. So after 1 year, there were 51 fully paid up members. By the end of 1919, there were 304. So at the meeting in May 1915, a council was appointed and the officers elected. And there is the first president, John Crosby Warren of Nottingham. He was born, as you can see from the slide, in Scotland. His family members of Aberdeen Unitarian Church, when, in fact, Alexander Gordon had been their minister, but he moved to Nottingham as a solicitor and joined High Pavement Chapel. Very active in congregational life and the Sunday school, warden and chairman of the congregation. He was greatly involved in a lot of institutions in the locality, including the Nottingham Institute for the Blind and the RSPCA. He was an early committed and active anti-vivisectionist. He founded a High Pavement Historical Society, a congregational historical society, and he was described in his obituary as someone for whom antiquarian matters always appealed to him, and our own traditions in particular were to him of living interest and a noble inspiration. The very details of the history of the least of our chapels symbolized an aristocracy of intellect and piety which must be preserved at all cost. And he was very much a hands-on president. He suggested the society at the very start. He presided over all the first meetings, and he gave a number of the first papers. So that's John Crosby Warren. There were 3 vice presidents, as you can see the names there. The first, Dr. John Campbell, was from Northern Ireland, from Ireland at the time. He was the son and great-nephew of ministers, a direct descendant of John Knox, and probably the most eminent of all the vice presidents. He was a very, very highly respected surgeon, founded a number of hospitals, later a member of the Northern Ireland Parliament, and knighted in 1925, with a keen interest in history. But the vice presidents reflected the different parts of the UK. So there's one from Ireland, one from Wales, Reverend Rhys Jenkins-Jones, very highly regarded retired minister who was also well known as a great scholar. He was minister in Aberdare for 40 years and editor of the Finnith for 12 years. Very well-known hymnodist in his day and translated many hymns into Welsh. But he was a very highly regarded scholar. He contributed 56 articles to the Dictionary of National Biography and was one of these people who could be turned to for information on any aspect of Welsh history. His knowledge was described as unique and far-reaching. Unfortunately, his name has been, all his articles have been misattributed in the current Oxford Dictionary of the National Biography, which is a great shame, the way something new like that can be created and get something as basic as that wrong. Third vice president was Reverend John Edwin Odgers, who was another distinguished Unitarian scholar and had been principal both of the Unitarian Home Missionary Board, which became UCM, and then Hibbert Lecturer in Ecclesiastical History at Manchester College. The general consensus is he'd never quite fulfilled his potential. There's a picture of him in the college there with the students and some of the staff. Estlin Carpenter, there's with the beard in the middle row, left of centre is Odgers, and to his left is Estlin Carpenter. He said he could not bring himself to the steady toil which a book required, and his long-planned definitive history of Unitarianism never appeared. It was to be a multi-authored volume, but he was to edit it. And Herbert McLaughlin was even more scathing. He described it as long conceived, frequently announced, and never completed by that gifted but sluggish scholar. So he didn't mince his words, McLaughlin, you know. But these three figures, although they're each distinguished in their own way, were probably not that much involved because it was really the officers who did all the work. So the first treasurer was R. Mortimer Montgomery. As you can see, he was a barrister from Chester of Ulster, very strong Ulster descent. And his membership really illustrates the big input to the society from lay people, which I'll return to. But the most significant name on the council at the start, undoubtedly, was this chap, the Reverend Walter Herbert Burgess. And he had a varied and successful ministerial career in many different parts of the country. In the words of Herbert McLaughlin, his dominating interest in life was Unitarian history, and he was a man of some distinction as a scholar. And he did write a lot of books, a lot of important congregational histories of places all over the country, and an important book on Baptist origins in England, and the biography, see the title page, of John Robinson. And there's no doubt that his energy and enthusiasm helped to give the society life and direction from its foundation. So he was both the first secretary and the first editor of the Transactions. And here's the front cover of the first issue of the Transactions. You can see it's dated April 1917. The first issue contained 100 pages, including 4 substantial articles, number of reviews, notes and queries, as well as an annual report. So the basic structure of the journal hasn't really changed in 100 years. From our perspective, this first issue is interesting because of the focus on the period of origin of Unitarianism in England. A lot of the articles looked at the period from the ejection of 1662 onwards, the era that saw the creation of the communities that became Unitarian in time. And this is generally true of a lot of the early articles. That reduces over time as there becomes more interest in Unitarianism as a theological idea or set of ideas. And as the century draws on, the transactions diversify into many different directions. But it's always been an effective meeting place for scholars, both amateur and professional, and has always maintained the highest standards of historical research and writing. Now, at this point, it's perhaps worth noting a full list of editors, though there's really not time to discuss them. You can see them there, and I'm very privileged to be at the end of a really very distinguished list. Just to mention the second name, she's not part of the first cohort, so we won't really talk about her today, but not only the first lay editor, but also the first woman editor, definitely of any historical journal of this nature, Anne Holt, very distinguished professional historian, and very notable Unitarian. Let's have a look at the rest of the council. There are all the names of the council members who weren't officers. Beyond the officers, there were 15 members, 11 of them ministers, 4 of them lay people, of which there was just 1 woman. The membership of the council included many with considerable knowledge of historical studies, and many who held prominent positions within the Unitarian movement. Many of the ministers were what we would regard as ministers of important plum positions in those days. I've tried to put in where they were, what they did at the time. 1915, 13 years before the foundation of the GA, and that's a move that really represented the consolidation of 2 different organizations, and that itself posed a number of historical questions. Mortimer Rowe puts it like this: in that history, 2 tendencies can be discerned, one expressing itself in the desire for lucid and definite theological teaching, the other in a desire for complete religious freedom. And so the society includes the secretaries of both predecessor bodies. They are there, the B&FUA and the National Conference. In the person of W.G. Tarrant, it included a previous and future editor of the Inquirer, a very influential person again. But the lay people are particularly worthy of note. Charles Fenton was a member of W.G. Tarrant's Wandsworth congregation, a senior civil servant in the India office. Another one, though, was Ronald P. Jones, member of a very distinguished Liverpool Unitarian family with ties to many of the great merchant families. However, in his own right, he was a distinguished architect. He designed West Kirby and Cambridge churches, among other things, and an architectural historian in his 1914 book, Nonconformist Church Architecture, still worth looking at. In the course of his long life, he gave a tremendous service to the Unitarian movement. He only died in 1965, and he's perhaps best remembered for his highly entertaining account of the negotiations leading up to the creation of the GA in 1928, which he wrote in the style of Samuel Pepys. He regularly commented on GA meetings and activities in the Inquirer for a number of years, and also gave a first-hand account of his experiences fire-watching at St. Paul's Cathedral. A lot of architects were summoned to St. Paul's to work as fire watchers, and he did that. And there he is at St. Paul's meeting the Queen Mother, who appears to be carrying a dead fox over her arm. But all these were published in 1947. And it's a very entertaining book. If you ever see a copy of it, it is very observable. You should get a copy. And if you want to hear about the creation of the GA, it's the best way to do it. He's particularly remembered for one phrase in the style of Mr. Pepys, given after yet another overlong anniversary service, when he said, "But Lord, how these parsons do always mistime their discourses." And I'm afraid it's a phrase that often comes into your head at the GA. Not just with parsons, one has to add, really. And the solitary female member of the council was Lucy Taggart, a very active member of the Council and Society, a leading member of and founding president of the Central Postal Mission and Unitarian Workers' Union, which was an imaginative, mission-oriented organization that tried to use the post for spreading Unitarian message. It was a very, very important body for women's activities. And there's a picture of the council, and Lucy Taggart's at the back there in the middle, and they're the council or committee of the Central Postal Mission. But she was a daughter of Edward Taggart, who was a friend of Dickens, and she visited a minister too, and she visited Transylvania on 2 occasions and edited the book Hungarian Unitarians in 1903. And she was active until her death in 1925. The final lay member of the council in the foundation year was Francis Nicholson, and in him we encounter not only a very active and engaged Unitarian in the northwest of England. He was secretary, treasurer, president of the Unitarian College, but someone with great scholarly attainments who's published research, often in collaboration with a fellow called Ernest Axon, who was another Northern Unitarian and remarkable scholar, reached a very high standard, and some of his books are still really classics of their kind. He was also a fellow of the Zoological Society and the vice chairman of the Cumberland and Westmoreland Wrestling Association. So very much a Renaissance man. And with him, we should link his name to his brother Albert, who wasn't a member of the initial council, but was a member of the society and was elected as the second president in 1919. And he contributed 80 entries to the original DNB. And he and his brother were outstanding historians. But one of the things we need to remember as we look at this formation of the society is that all this took place in the middle of the First World War. And when the first public meeting was held in May, on the 27th of May 1915, it was just 2 days after the end of the Second Battle of Ypres. The first AGM was held on the 14th of June 1916, just over 2 weeks before the Battle of the Somme. So everyone was touched by the war. And here is Dr. John Campbell, who is the vice president, and he can't possibly have been at that meeting because this picture was taken in April 1915. As you can see, he's in uniform. He was a surgeon at a hospital near the front, and that's where he spent most of the war, and working in a Red Cross hospital. John Warren, the first president, he took over while his son was serving in the army. John Crosby Warren Jr. was commissioned in the 7th Battalion Sherwood Foresters and served throughout the war, mentioned in dispatches twice, and awarded the Military Cross in October 1915. But he was killed in the last year of the war and is one of those recorded in the War Memorial in the former High Pavement Chapel. And so the war must have really pervaded the thoughts of everybody in the society. Although you wouldn't necessarily guess this from reading the accounts of those times. An exception to this is a very long letter running to over 2,500 words from the Reverend H.D. Roberts and published in Inquirer in October 1917. Now this was written by Lieutenant H.D. Roberts from somewhere in France, and at the age of 56, and there he is, that's actually taken 8 years before he was 56, so he was no spring chicken. But at the age of 56, he joined up and then in the ranks and was commissioned into the Royal Engineers, where he served as a transport officer. So for Roberts and others, the war concentrated the mind. He wanted the society to demonstrate what he called the history of freedom of religious thought. And he wrote a long letter to the Inquirer. There's not time really to quote from it. So there were different opinions about how the society should develop, but there wasn't really any controversy, and it soon diversified into giving consideration of many aspects of and trends within Unitarian history. It was also very early on an attempt to make the society as accessible to its members as possible, with a policy for holding a meeting in London and one in the north every year. And this generally was the template right up to the 1930s. There were two meetings each year. Another feature of the society's activities in the early years was the establishment of a library. And this seems to have been a very successful project, although it has a rather cryptic history. And to be honest, there's been no mention in any of the Society's publications or minutes of the library for around 40 years. So I do wonder what happened to the library, but that's for another day. When the council was assembled, the membership included most of those who we might term the usual suspects. But to finish, I'd just like to talk about some of the omissions. There were some strange omissions, and one was Herbert McLaughlin. And Herbert McLaughlin was already tutor at UCM since 1911, lecturer in Greek at the University of Manchester. He'd already embarked on a very, very distinguished history, his role as historian of Unitarianism and dissent, and was a chief member not only of the college but of the University Faculty of Theology, the first free faculty of theology in Britain. He published a major work on the history of the college in 1915. So it's surprising to see he wasn't on the council at the start, but that's corrected very soon. And the next year he's invited on, and he adds service to this society to his long list of achievements. There's a photograph of him in later life. Some of you will know this picture. There he is in the front and the middle with a selection of Unitarian ministers in Liverpool at the time. And some of them related to some of us here today and at the GA. But that's him. Very, very, very significant figure. And his main works really stand to this day as books that are worth reading, books that should be read. And some of them really remain the standard text for decades, and it's only really now they've been surpassed. But there's some of his books. I just realised I had a few there, and I just stuffed them together. But there's many more. Heavyweight scholar, and his contribution to this society ranks very high. He was a member of the council for over 40 years, president, also editor for a number of years, and contributed 22 articles to the Transactions, including many obituaries of notable Unitarians. He is, I think I'm right in saying, the only member of the council to have his own entry in the DNB, which Alan wrote. But I don't think anyone else, very carefully, but I don't think any other council member is mentioned in the DNB. And because he did a tremendous job in the Unitarian College collecting vast library. Another mysterious omission, which was not so quickly remedied, was the Reverend George Eyre Evans. He's a very important figure. He wrote widely and prodigiously on Unitarian history in relation to Liverpool and Devon and Shropshire, and also in terms of the history and antiquities of Wales, particularly Cardiganshire. And he's greatly remembered and honoured in Wales. For 18 years, he was inspecting officer of the Royal Commission on Ancient Monuments in Wales and Monmouthshire. And he built up the County Museum in Carmarthen. Like R.J. Jones mentioned before, he has an entry in the Dictionary of Welsh Biography. He was a freeman of the borough of Carmarthen. But by 1915, 1916, he was in his late 50s. He'd established himself through many publications, very well known to historians still to this day. He was an expert in non-parochial church registers held then in Somerset House. And his omission is even more surprising when one notes that he contributed an annual article to the Transactions on our communion plate and other treasures from 1927 up to 1940, which is actually the year after his death, which is very much illustrative of his antiquarian interests and an important, although uncompleted, source for a neglected aspect of Unitarian history. He was also by far the main supplier of questions for notes and queries. And he was eventually invited to join the council in 1934 when he was 77. So they kept him waiting. Now, I was going to say he's the only council member that has his own blue plaque, but Alan just showed us R.T. Hereford's, R. Trafford Hereford. So he's not the only one. He's one of two members of the council who have their own blue plaque, and this one is in Wales, in Carmarthen, in the museum which he set up. And the final name to be omitted is the biggest one. That's Alexander Gordon. And it's a strange note to finish on because he wasn't a member of the council, but he was without doubt the most prominent Unitarian historian of his day by a large margin. That's him on the left in his youthful days. On the right, that's the last photograph of him taken on his way to the church in Dunmurry in 1931, just a few weeks before he died. One of the strange things, though, is he was invited to be the president, and he declined. He didn't join the society, although he was a member of all the other societies we saw at the start. Not only that, he contributed to the journals of all the other societies, but not to this one. He was particularly devoted to the Presbyterian Historical Society of Ireland, which I have to confess, I'm also a member of that, and on the council of that as well. And there's often overlap. And when this photograph was taken just a few days before, he chaired the main meeting of the Presbyterian Historical Society of Ireland in Belfast. But he never joined this society. And he was nevertheless held in great esteem by the society and its members. And on his 80th birthday, the society sent him formal greetings and congratulations. He replied, I quote, "As one who has found an unfailing delight in that field of complicated and curious research," adding that our history teaches something more than tolerance. It helps us to admire and appreciate many from whom we are compelled to differ. And with this too, he observed, one soon finds that there are as many sorts of Unitarians as of Trinitarians, though there is this point of difference. Even when they have not been too fond of each other, they've never gone to the Trinitarian length of damning one another. So, we must end. Thank you.